What's going on, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. This week, we chat with Christopher Aumueller, a tennis player from Germany who moved all the way to Lincoln, Nebraska to play for the Huskers. Just like in last week's episode with Canadian soccer player Angelica Galuzzo, Chris talks about being recruited to play a D1 sport from another country, along with how he completely changed his life plans to make it happen. He also gives us insight on the creation of his company, Fanword. So again, welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So we're back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast, and I'm sitting here with Chris. And Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time out. Really looking forward to today's conversation. It's going to be a bit different, as I'm sure people will find out as they're listening. But as I always like to start out, I'm going to let you kind of intro and kind of give people a little bit of perspective on you, where you're from, and a little bit of your background. So Chris, I'm going to let you take it away.
Yeah, I appreciate you having us, or me, I guess I should say, Ryan. Name is Chris Aumueller, originally from Germany, which is why I sound a little funny. I grew up in a fairly small town of 80,000 people called Bayreuth, which is in the beautiful state of Bavaria. And I came over to Lincoln, Nebraska in 2008 to play tennis for the Huskers. Stuck around in Lincoln, started a company called Fanword in 2018, and pretty heavily involved in the NIL and student athlete brand development space. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And like you said, it's very different, right? So what was it like growing up where you're from in Germany, and did you start playing tennis from a young age?
Yeah, I started playing when I was around 6 years old. My dad and my older brother played recreationally, and just kind of, as a youngest of two, I just kind of tagged along. And then, a tennis coach that probably wanted to make some extra money just saw me hit a few balls and was like, "Hey, your son, your youngest one, has quite a bit of talent. I think you should take some lessons." And that's really what kind of started the whole journey, I guess. So I started playing when I was around 6. Started playing more competitively around the age of 10. And then, pretty much had everything kind of planned out for life after high school back home in Germany. Knew which school I wanted to go to, what I wanted to study, and it did not involve the US or college sports. It was simply a concept I wasn't familiar with at all until, the first coach kind of contacted me my senior/junior year of high school. But growing up, it was, a lot about tennis, a lot about high school. And then, in Germany, we don't really have a system that I guess supports continuing your academic journey as well as an athletic one. It's very, very hard to combine the two back home. So I was pretty much set on, just going to school, pursuing that path, and kind of laying low, or taking some time away from tennis, I guess I should say. But then, obviously things changed, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned is you weren't really looking at, coming to the United States and playing tennis. What was that path that you wanted to take with, staying in Germany? Was it, going to work? Was it continuing to play and train and, maybe enter some of these international tournaments on the professional level? What was your plan before you got that first call that senior year?
Yeah, so tennis at the time, I was a top 5 junior in my age group in Germany, but nonetheless, I never had the, I guess, believe that I could turn pro right after high school and do this full time. In fact, I never even crossed my mind, because I knew way too many people from back home that were, number one in the country, number one in Europe, number one in the world, and they're juniors, and just failed, because tennis is a very, very difficult sport to go pro in. So I never really had the confidence, I guess, that I could, make that happen. So my journey always involved going to university. But again, it was to go to a school back home. In fact, it was a sports management program that I wanted to go to. Actually, in my hometown, we have the best sports management program in the country, and it is a very, very unique program that's actually quite difficult to describe. But it's kind of like a mix of actually doing sports and being an athlete, as well as kind of the academic side of it. So really, again, the sports management side of it. And what our program really became known for, or I guess I shouldn't even say became known for, but if you look at the alumni base from that program, I mean, pretty much, I mean, the amount of folks, the amount of alumni from that program that now have leading positions in Bundesliga teams, or the biggest sports marketing agencies, or the sports leagues in Germany. I mean, it's remarkable how many people from that degree, from that program, kind of took that path, and that was something that I wanted to do as well. So my mind and my heart was pretty set on that until the first couple of calls kind of came in.
Mm-hmm. Now we'll get back to that. The phone calls coming in. Can you kind of, give some insight on what the structure of sports looks like in Germany? Because obviously here in the United States, you've got your youth programs, you've got your feeder programs into high school and junior high, and there's a level tiered system to it.
Mm-hmm.
What's it like? What's the support behind the youth systems? You said you started when you were 10. What's that structure of athletics like, and how would you say it differs from here in the United States?
Yeah, so for us, it's really all about club sports. That's really, I guess, where pretty much any athlete evolves in. So we do have high school sports, we do have university sports, but completely different level, and not really something you can compare to. It's more like a recreational thing where you sign up to be a part of the soccer team, or you play tennis or whatever. Like I played 5 high school sports on a team. But again, it's more like a, sign up and then you compete once or twice a semester, and it's fun. It's but it's you don't have a coach per se, or you don't have structured practices or anything. So we don't have that support level, I guess, in high school and in college, I guess I should say. So for us, it's really all about club sports. That's kind of where you develop as an athlete with coaches, et cetera, et cetera. Then we obviously have, state federations and national, federations that kind of support their up and coming talents. But it's more so, maybe inviting a group to like camps and having coaches kind of, guide them through a week of practices or conditioning practices, or maybe you travel with the federation to a few tournaments here and there. But it's not like year-round support or anything along those lines. So it's really kind of up to you, and it's really across most sports. So it's not just tennis specific, but it's really up to you and your parents to kind of take your own path, and you usually start excelling in club sports and developing in club sports, and then just kind of go from there and kind of do your own thing, and hopefully an opportunity like this arises, which tennis is a very international sport here in the US. Mm-hmm. So that was fortunate, but for many other athletes back home, college sports isn't really an option, because a lot of these sports don't really scout over in Europe, or certainly not in Germany. So yeah.
And you said you and your brother were tennis players, and that's kind of how you got started. Did you guys ever compete against each other, or was it more so practice and more of a sibling rivalry kind of a thing?
Yeah, no, he played very recreationally. So he played, again, we have that club, system, I guess, in Germany, and that includes leagues as well. So he played a fairly low league, and probably, he's 6 years older than I am. I would say by the time I was 12 or 13, I probably would have beat him. So we never competed against each other. But again, he just played it as a hobby. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did he kind of help you as like a training partner? I mean, you kind of have a built-in training partner, but or were you seeking out your friends that were kind of playing more on your level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, it was really all about, again, working with my club coach and the group that our state, our county, pretty much like my coach was kind of again, it's maybe hard to describe, but he was kind of like the designated coach for the most talented players in the county. So everyone from 50-mile or 30-mile radius came to him pretty much to practice. So I was part of these group practices. You have individual lessons with that coach as well. And obviously every once in a while you do just hit with, another kid, but it was more so people my age and in my age group, rather than my brother who, again, it was a hobby for him. So he was more into other things in life than, playing tennis. So was he supportive? Absolutely. But it wasn't a hey, let's go out and hit every day kind of thing or a couple times a week. So no, that wasn't necessarily the case.
Yeah. So let's get back to the recruiting angle. I know you just said, that first call came when you were a junior, senior level. Do you remember who that first call came from, and what was it like for you and your family to get this call, and how did it change those plans that you said you had already had?
Yeah, 100%. So the first call came from Jörg Bartel, who was the assistant coach at the University of Nebraska at the time, and he was German. So he was very, very familiar with the German rankings. And again, I had a good ranking at the time. So he gave me a phone call. He got my number from, I think he called up, the federation and got my number from them. And then, he gave me a call, told me who he is, what he's doing, and that he would like to, invite me to come over and play college tennis. And I said, hey, Jörg, really appreciate it, but not really interested. So don't really know anything about this. So appreciate it. And pretty much ended the conversation. So that first call didn't go anywhere because I just felt like, I got my plans figured out. I know what I wanted to do, and this wasn't it. But then, like within the next 2 weeks, I got 6 other offers from other schools. And that's when I really started to kind of look into college sports and college tennis a bit more. And I actually found out, and Jörg obviously told me that, but I didn't really, I guess, think about it at the time. But there was a guy on the Nebraska team that I knew from back home because he was German as well. And I kind of grew up with him. So I reached out to him as well. And I said, hey, man, tell me a little bit about, what is this? So I did a little bit of research, talked to my friend, and then just kind of realized, hey, this sounds fantastic. This is something I think I want to, give a shot. And what was really, comforting to me and as well as my parents was the thought of, if I were to give this a try and it doesn't work out, it's not going to, prevent me from pursuing another path or going back to, what I wanted to do initially. Like I knew it was just, maybe a semester, to give it a try. And if I didn't like it, I could come back and go back to that school that I initially wanted to go to. So the downside was really, really low. And with the offer of a scholarship, the financial burden was minimized too. So, that's really when I started to take this a bit more seriously and really thought that this could be a great opportunity to experience, the US and get some cultural knowledge as well, something that I was actually quite interested in as an 18-year-old. All these things kind of just came together, and then, started having these conversations with all of these coaches, including Jörg again. And then Jörg came to visit. He was actually in Germany to recruit, and he just stopped by our hometown and he watched me practice. He sat in our living room and talked to me and my parents. And we just kind of felt good about it after that conversation and decided, let's give this a shot. And I guess that's kind of it.
Mm-hmm. How many other coaches made that sort of effort? Were there any others that did more than call, that came and watched you practice, or that you came to the United States and visited? What was that process like for you being in Germany and being recruited by these United States universities?
Yeah, good question. So nobody else came to visit, but I also, in the grand scheme of things, then kind of signed fairly early with Nebraska, meaning when a lot of these coaches may have considered visiting, I was already committed. So I had all these other schools actually offered full rides as well as Nebraska. So I guess my ranking kind of and my results kind of spoke for themselves enough for these coaches to believe I'd be a good fit. And then, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of times you do a recruiting trip, right, where you fly over, get to experience everything for like a weekend and then fly back. But I didn't do that and never asked for it either. Quite frankly, I didn't know that even was a thing until I came over and realized that everybody else was doing it. So, yeah, no, grand scheme of things, Jörg was definitely doing the most. And that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to go to Nebraska, is because, I just didn't feel like I was just a recruit, for the, lack of a better way of describing it. I really felt like they cared about me, and they certainly put in the extra effort to, come watch me play, talk to my parents. And again, sure, yeah, he was German. He was on a German recruiting trip, but nonetheless, he made the effort to stop by and spend all these hours with me and my parents and my coach actually as well. So that meant a lot, and just from the get-go felt like this was a good relationship, and one of the main reasons I ended up signing with Nebraska.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned like he was on a German recruiting trip. How much, and you've been obviously around tennis for many years now. How many of these, overseas recruiting trips have you seen other coaches do? And have you seen it become more normalized? I mean, obviously, you were in college around the same time I was, that 2008, 2009, time. How have you seen that type of international recruiting grow since, you made the trip to go from Germany to Nebraska?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's very hard for me to talk about other sports, obviously, because I don't know really what the intricacies are, there. But tennis, as I mentioned earlier, is a really, really international sport in college, arguably the most international one. So it's kind of been the norm, I guess, in tennis to recruit outside of the U.S. And in fact, I think a lot of the institutions have to rely on international talent because a lot of the U.S. kids just go to, a handful of schools that, are often in the South and are just very, very attractive destinations just from a location or from a climate, kind of perspective. But a lot of, the Europeans or Asians or folks from other countries that aren't really familiar with that, they care about other stuff. And I don't want to say that U.S. kids don't care about other stuff than, if it's sunny and they're near a beach or so, but it's very, very hard to recruit a really good American kid to, let's say, a school like Nebraska or so. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of became the norm that, college coaches look at international recruits in college tennis. So I don't know per se if it changed in terms of, how often coaches fly over, how many recruiting trips are overseas compared to what it was in 2008 or 2009 when I was a freshman and sophomore, or 2007 when I was recruited. So I can't really speak to that per se, but I know for a fact that it continues to be a major, recruiting effort and just part of the process, I guess, for college coaches to go overseas to recruit talent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So once you get to campus, and it's obviously going to be a lot different for you than it would be for, other United States recruits, right? That, I've talked to other people that are like, yeah, I was going from, Maryland to Pennsylvania, or, I was going across the country from Pennsylvania to Arizona, and there's a culture shock and things like that. For you, there's a huge culture shock, right? You're coming to a completely different country. What was that like when you get to campus and, you said you already had one person that was on the team that you had known, and then obviously the coach is also from Germany as well. But, how out of place is that feeling once you get there as an 18, 19-year-old in Nebraska?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love to tell that story because I think things kind of worked out in my favor. Like I remember my very first experience in the U.S. was the Chicago airport. So that was me, first time all by myself. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it certainly lived up to its expectations. But so canceled flight, right? Instantly had to spend the night in Chicago, not knowing, where I needed to go, what I needed to do. So I was instantly kind of thrown in the water of just, hey, figure this out. So I did that, and then I remember also, paying a cab driver to take me from Terminal 1 to Terminal 2 because I didn't know there was like a train connecting the terminals. So, it's just kind of like all these experiences of a kid that has never been in the U.S., an 18-year-old or 19-year-old. I don't remember how old I was at the time, but just kind of, making mistakes like this, I guess I should say. And then, when I got picked up in Omaha is what I flew into, my coach picked me up, and I had absolutely no time to breathe because of that delay, because of that canceled flight. My coach dropped me off right on campus. I had to take a math placement test. Right after that, I had to take an English placement test, and I had to go to an orientation for international athletes. Then he dropped me off at my apartment, which was unfurnished. I was instantly kind of dealing with so many things that I didn't really have time to be homesick or to think about, all these things that maybe some other kids think about when they leave home for the first time. For me, it was really just, go instantly. And you also kind of instantly get thrown into this community, certainly at Nebraska, and I don't know how other schools do it, but again, the first time I got on campus, I was part of maybe 20 other kids that were all internationals, and you instantly make friendships and kind of share these experiences with them. So my parents, they were worried. I can't even imagine, because I also couldn't communicate with them. At the time, there was no, and hopefully nobody will research this, but I don't think there were phones with Wi-Fi. Or at least my phone didn't have Wi-Fi. Let's put it this way. So I couldn't
very limited
connect
international calling at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. So I remember, I had Skype, but I needed a laptop at the time to have Skype. So, until I got to my laptop and could connect to somewhere with Wi-Fi and Skype my parents, I think it was like a 48 hours, like after I had left Germany. So my parents were worried like crazy, and I couldn't communicate with them. Anyways, but yeah, to answer your question, so I mean, culturally, sure, it is different, but fortunately, Germany is fairly similar to what the U.S. is, and when I say the U.S., sure, there are big differences between what it's like in New York versus Nebraska or in L.A. or whatever, but nonetheless, it was instantly, so there was never a culture shock per se, right? So I never really was like, what the heck is this? And this doesn't make sense to me or anything like this. And again, the big piece was definitely that community feeling that I got from the get-go. And I think the Huskers certainly did, and I would assume they still do, a phenomenal job of integrating you the moment you get on campus and not feeling, alone or that you kind of have to tackle all of this by yourself. So that was really, really helpful for me. And just kind of having that experience from the get-go. Certainly made things easier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the things you mentioned is that you had to take placement tests. So let's talk a little academic structure. What's the difference when, and you're immersed in it immediately with an English placement test and a math placement test? What is the difference in I'm trying to think in the academic structure between the United States and Germany, and how you kind of came about, how everything kind of came about once you got on campus.
Yeah, so I mean, and again, I can't speak to other countries per se, but in Germany, for instance, in high school, we have really, really good math education. So that math placement test, for instance, was every international athlete has to take it, and that's kind of how they determine in your first semester which math class you have to take. And it was kind of, it was very, very easy for me, so that wasn't an issue. And then the same concept applied to the English placement test. It was, you sit in a room with 300 other international athletes, and everybody comes from a different background. I had, at the time, I think 8 or 9 years of high school English, and sure, it's not, per se conversational English, but you learn enough about grammar and just words in general that you can certainly get around and communicate. But some other kids certainly, didn't have that same background. So you sit in a room with like 300 other kids. It's a 3-hour test. And, one of the sections was, a professor up there playing a recorder that says, Bob is buying a bike. And then on your bubble sheet, it says, what is Bob buying? Car, bike, computer. So it's just stuff like this where you just sit there and you're like, okay. And you do that for 3 hours. So it was very, very, simple again for me as well, but only because I had come from a place that, again, valued in this case math as well as language education. So I was pretty fortunate when it comes to that. I do not know what the experience is like for an international, for instance, to join a German school if they have to do similar tests. But I certainly, again, at Nebraska at the very least, and I would assume most other colleges do the same thing, to just understand kind of where you fit in, right, from a language as well as like a math base, I guess, part. They just do these placement tests. Unfortunately for me, they were pretty simple. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you had said that you kind of had your plans already before you got any calls. You do that, the sports management, you were going to go to the university, and it was sports management all the way. When things change and you say you're going to go to Nebraska, is that the first thing you look at is, okay, if I'm going to go to Nebraska instead, do they have the courses that I want? The academic side has to fit, because your plan was completely shaped around this. Is that one of the things that you discussed with your parents and made sure that they had before leaving?
Yeah, actually spot on. I really, really wanted to go sports management or sports marketing. Unfortunately, Nebraska at the time didn't have that. So it was a tough, battle for me to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. But nonetheless, I think the experience of getting a foreign degree, or potentially getting a foreign degree at the time, was more important to me than actually the type of degree. I always thought that just having that on my resume as a German, having a foreign, bachelor or master's or whatever else on there, would be really, really valuable anywhere around the world, because it showcases that, you as an international managed to get this done pretty much on your own or with your family / parents being thousands of miles away. You were able to adjust and kind of, be an independent person at 19 years old and really manage everything on your own, like setting up a bank account when you're 19 years old and doing all that good stuff that maybe a kid from the US doesn't necessarily have to worry about. So you're really on your own. And that piece was that learning to be independent and really becoming this hopefully mature kid by the age of 19, because otherwise you're just not going to make it, was something that was very, very appealing to me. So unfortunately, Nebraska didn't have per se the major that I wanted to pursue, but I ended opting for a marketing major, which marketing was actually more down my alley than management per se. And I always been a creative person. I love the concept of marketing. So the major choice at the end was fine. But yeah, I certainly did look at that and wanted to make sure that, I didn't come over here just to play tennis, by no means. In fact, I would say that my priorities were probably academically before athletically. So it was more important to me to get that degree than maybe pursuing the tennis path. But yeah, at the end of the day, it all worked out just fine. But yeah, to your point, I definitely looked into that, and it took me a few weeks probably to really figure out what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm. So, on that athletic side, that's probably where you felt the most secure, right? You're racket in hand, ready to go. What was it like when you first start playing, and how did you see yourself grow on the court?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that it's something that's very, very hard to prepare you for. I mean, again, in Germany, it's all club sports, right? So I practice 3 or 4 times a week back home, twice in a group, twice with a coach individually, and then I maybe play a tournament every other week or once a month or something like this. And you come over here, and I mean, you practice 6 times a week, 3 hours a day with the same group, with the same coaches. During season, you travel every week. You miss school 2 days a week during the spring semester, and you have to manage to get it all done on your own schedule and timeline. It's not for everybody. Fortunately for me, it was a dream come true. Like, I absolutely loved it, and I excelled in that environment of just being pushed and growing together with the same group of athletes that all kind of had the same goals and aspirations, right? Like, often in Germany, these kids that you're in a group with, they might have different plans and different objectives, but in this case, in college, they all want to do the same thing. And I just absolutely love that environment and pushing one another to maximize your on-court level and your fitness and all that good stuff. And yeah, I mean, obviously it helped that I quickly found my footing on the hard court as well, which is what you play on tennis in the US. In Germany, you play on clay court for the most part. During the winter, you play on I guess, carpet. But nonetheless, it was my first time playing on a different surface, or playing on hard court, I should say. So fortunately, I played really well. My game was suited for it pretty well. So from the get-go, I had quite a bit of success in college. I actually remember the very first tournament I played in. It was the All-American tournament. And in tennis, that's like the largest tournament. So there were like, I think, 256 college players. It's a 256 draw. And I lose first round in like what's called the pre-qualifying. And I'm like, holy cow, that is a remarkable level. I can't believe there's 256 players and I lose first round, because, hey, you're good in Germany, right? You're one of the top juniors, and you think you come over here and you do well. But no, that was a really big eye-opening experience from the get-go. And I remember my coaches actually being really, really harsh on me after I lose that match, because they felt like, it's just different. They felt like I didn't give 100% effort, and it's just something you got to get used to. And then I remember my second match of my career, I played against the number one in the country, and I lose, but I play him very competitively. And then I win my next 5 matches, like, against really good guys. And that's instantly where I knew, wow, the level between the number one in the country and, maybe the 200th player in the country is actually pretty close. So these kids can all play tennis. And it was really, really cool to be a part of that and just kind of learn, what college tennis is like in those first few weeks and months. And again, fortunately, I did pretty well, shortly after that first tournament. So it was, it was an easy transition, I guess, for me. And again, together with your team and the environment that you were in and the resources that Nebraska provided, there was everything there to really become the best player you could possibly be. And I loved that. And I took advantage of it. And yeah, so to answer your very short question, it was a fairly easy transition, fortunately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the tennis career continues, and you've got a host of accolades. You've got all Big Ten. You've got all Big 12 when Nebraska was also in the Big 12 before moving over to the Big 10, and you start collecting these accolades. So obviously you're transitioning, but what is the thought behind the next step? You know, do I stay with a racket in hand, or do I create Fanword like you did? What was there kind of a fork in the road, or were you always thinking, and you had said, you know, it was always a thought about more academic than athletic, but as your career is going and you're collecting these accolades, do you start thinking more athletically, or did it stay more of a business outlook for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And truthfully, I just recently had a very in-depth conversation about this with another friend of mine. And I don't know if the word regret is appropriate, but there's certainly an uncertainty that I never got a chance to kind of feed, which was, again, what could I have done on the professional tour, which, you know, I never pursued. Like, I decided after college, all right, you still make some maybe secondary income with tennis by playing league tennis in Germany and playing a few prize money tournaments here and there. But I never pursued the professional route, which, you know, again, to this point, I don't know if I would say I regret not doing it, but I certainly would have loved to see how far I could have made it, because I did really well in college. And I was at a point where, you know, a lot of my colleagues that were around similar, you know, ranking in college did give it a try. And sure, many failed, but a lot of them, or some of them, also made it, and are now competing at the US Open and you know, all the Grand Slams and stuff. And I was just always like, I always think in tennis it's actually good if you have a little bit of, if you're a bit naive, which I don't want it to sound negatively, but I was always approaching it from a very like rational perspective. And I knew, like, okay, you have to be top 200 in the world to make a living off of that sport. You know, I just kind of knew, I guess, or felt like I knew what it would take to get to that level. And I wasn't financially in a position to make that happen. I don't think I was physically in a position to make that happen. And yeah, mentally, probably not either, because I never, you know, had the confidence that I could do this. So I think it's good when in tennis you're just kind of approaching it. Again, I don't want it to come across like negatively, that or certainly don't want to say that everyone giving it a shot is naive. But I think a little bit of just like, you know, I don't care kind of attitude is really, really helpful. And I didn't have that. So for me, and again, what I kind of fell back on, which was Fanword, was always a dream of mine. So it was, you know, something I pursued certainly still while playing, or started at least thinking about, I should say. So it wasn't okay, what do I got to do now that I'm not playing more? But it was still, again, to this day, I wish I would have at least given it a shot for like a year or two, to just kind of see, you know, what could have been, and maybe find a sponsor to help support, you know, the journey financially. But I never did. So, yeah.
And now you have Fanword. When did you said you thought about it while you were in college, but when did you fully launch the company, and how did it kind of come about?
Yeah, so I mean, the concept for Fanword certainly, or like the general idea, yeah, it did kind of come to me while I was still playing, actually, which was, I was just kind of exposed to so many brilliant athletes that I felt like weren't getting the recognition I felt like they deserved, right? It was a lot about college football, obviously, and college basketball, which I'm not saying with any sort of, you know, criticism, it's just what it is. But I just knew that there were so many, you know, soccer players and track athletes and swimmers and tennis players that did phenomenal things on and off the court, but nobody really knew about it or talked about it. So I always felt like, hey, what could I do to, you know, help shed some light on these, you know, lesser known athletes, for the lack of a better word, and also kind of just help athletes in general, I guess, kind of win outside of sports, even like the high profile athletes. I felt like everything was just so, you know, narrowed down to their, you know, performance on the field and numbers and stats. But, you know, when you watch the Husker football game, you could go to 100 different platforms to follow the scoreline and the stats and stuff, but you couldn't really learn about who these players were, certainly not who they were, you know, kind of off the field. And that was something that I was always very, very passionate about, of just, you know, highlighting kind of, again, who athletes are kind of underneath the jersey, and also just, being recognized for being more than an athlete. And yeah, it started off with maybe athletes that nobody really talked about, but the more I kind of looked into it, the more I realized it's the same for high profile athletes too. They're just often being kind of, defined by what they do on the field. So that was really kind of what sparked the journey back in the day. And then, yeah, I was getting my master's, my MBA at the time, and took an entrepreneurship class where the professor kind of, I'm going to use the word force. Not sure if it's accurate, but he kind of forced me to talk about it because he knew I had an idea. And I was always kind of, not really wanting to talk about it, but he kind of forced me to talk about it. And that was kind of really the start, I guess, of looking at this from a business perspective, and not just, hey, it's a cool idea if you could help X, Y, and Z, but really start thinking about it from a business angle. Okay, how could you make this happen? How could you monetize this, et cetera, et cetera. And then, yeah, after my master's, I started actually still working on a PhD. And that was still before I launched Fanword. But I was in the final stages, I guess, of really launching Fanword when I started the PhD program. So it was a really tough time for like a year and a half of trying to juggle both things. And then I made that decision to give Fanword a try. Launched Fanword, quit the PhD, and then, here we are.
Yeah. And how have you seen Fanword grow since that first day where the website went public? How have you seen things grow for you over these years?
Yeah, I mean, we had a ton of pivots, right? I think it's normal for any first time business owner and just for any startup really, that when you launch, things will change. And I think one of the hardest things for any founder is to admit that what you kind of initially thought was the case just isn't true when the market really tells you differently, and what you were so incredibly passionate about or into turned out to be just not true. And I think a lot of founders have a hard time accepting those facts and making that pivot, and certainly wasn't easy for me, and it took me a while to make changes, but fortunately I did. But I think in itself, the mission, I guess, of empowering athletes and helping athletes kind of win outside of sports, that passion has never changed. That mission has never changed. It's still the same today. It's just a matter of how you're solving that problem and how you're pursuing it. And that has certainly once again changed over the years. Today, we're incredibly heavily focused on brand development. So pretty much all we do, all the products we have are geared towards helping athletes build their brands and protect those brands. And with NIL, also help them kind of monetize those brands. But that's what we build products around. It's still the same concept of helping athletes kind of become known for, again, building their brand, right? And becoming known for more than just being an athlete, and leveraging that brand to the best of their abilities. And so, yeah, it's been a really, really fun and challenging journey, but I think you got to be open-minded to making these pivots and adjusting, as those days and weeks and months go by. And fortunately, I like to think we've done the right pivots over the years, but things certainly changed quite a bit from that first conversation I had in class about the business.
Mm-hmm. So we're at the point now where I want to get into our 5 question segment. I'm going to shout out 5 questions. You give kind of a quick response, a little bit of nuance to it, and we'll move to the next one. So the first one is, what's your most memorable tennis match?
Most memorable tennis match is probably, unfortunately, one against South Carolina where I broke my foot and tore all my ligaments, because it was a major shifting point in my career. That was my sophomore year.
Yeah. Who's somebody that you either grew up kind of idolizing as a young tennis player, or that you kind of look to now as somebody that has really changed the game?
Roger Federer, without a doubt.
If you could play against anyone, past, present, who would it be?
Roger Federer.
Kind of set you up for that one.
He will kick my butt pretty hard, but still, just sharing the court with him would be, once in a lifetime experience for sure.
Yeah. What's a goal that you have for Fanword that you would like for you and your team to accomplish in the next year?
Honestly, probably just keep doing what we're doing. Sounds very cheesy and lame, but I know for a fact from talking with the athletes that we work with and the schools that we work with that we're making an impact, and that's really what we're all about. We do help athletes really make the most of their NIL and their brand, and that is something that I couldn't be more proud of. So I really think just kind of going further down this path and further, modifying and adjusting products and offerings to help those young men and women do just that. That's exactly what we want to do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the last question is, you work with a good amount of athletes and schools. What's a piece of advice that you're either instilling in the athletes you work with now, or something that you learned from your days as a young athlete, or look back on now, and it's kind of a nuance now that you're outside of the game, but like a piece of advice that you think that the next generation should know?
Yeah, I think especially now in the NIL age, I think we often forget to kind of enjoy the journey. We're kind of so heavily focused on the destination and the outcome, and that we often forget to enjoy getting there. And that's something that we often, like, I think above everything else, whether you build your brand or whether you do deals or whatever that looks like, you got to enjoy that. And I think it's something that we tend to forget. So I'll keep it very, very simple because I could go on and on about this, but I really do think that just learning how to embrace and enjoy the journey is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. So Chris, I really enjoyed this. Before I let you go, I want you to kind of give a plug to Fanword. Where can people find you? What's the website? And anything else about Fanword you want to let us know about?
Yeah, Ryan, happy to, and appreciate you having me. Very much enjoyed this as well. Certainly people can find our website, fanword.com. Probably, most active on LinkedIn and Twitter, Fanword handle. Also, people are more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, Christopher Aumueller. But yeah, that's about it.
All right, Chris. Well, I really appreciate it. It was great conversation. I love hearing about the differences between countries and how you navigated, kind of being dropped in Chicago airport again. Sorry that was your first experience, but everyone kind of goes through it, going through Chicago, getting a flight canceled. I've done it plenty of times myself. But this was great. For anyone listening or watching, definitely look out for Fanword. High school students, definitely reach out to Chris. College students, definitely reach out to him as well. He's there to help you out, as well as us here at Athletes to Athletes. And I really appreciate this conversation today, Chris. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. To make sure you don't miss when a new episode comes your way, head to the Athletes to Athletes YouTube page to like and subscribe, or to Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcast. Again, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next time.